Netflix didn't just kill Blockbuster. It almost killed itself in the process. Today, Netflix feels inevitable, like it was always destined to win. But that's not how it looked in the beginning. In the early 2000s, Blockbuster was a monster. Thousands of stores, millions of customers. Entire weekends built around walking those blue and yellow aisles. Netflix, meanwhile, was mailing DVDs in red envelopes. No stores. No late fees. No real leverage. If you were betting back then, you wouldn't have chosen Netflix. You would have chosen the company with the scale, the cash, and the brand recognition. But dominance has a blind spot. Blockbuster thought it owned movie rentals. Netflix realized people didn't want rentals at all. They wanted convenience, control, and zero friction. This is not a story about better technology. It's a story about understanding customers more deeply than your competitors do. And it's also a warning. Because the same company that disrupted Blockbuster later made a decision so bad, it nearly destroyed itself. Users revolted. The stock collapsed. Trust evaporated. Netflix survived. Barely. What makes this story powerful isn't that Netflix won. It's how close it came to losing. Because the lessons here apply far beyond streaming. They apply to startups. To established businesses. To anyone who thinks their current advantage makes them safe. Blockbuster wasn't stupid. They were comfortable. Netflix wasn't lucky. They were willing to be uncomfortable, even when it hurt. And that difference changed an entire industry. To understand how Netflix won, you first need to understand how powerful Blockbuster was. At its peak, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores worldwide. It dominated the movie rental market so completely that alternatives barely mattered. Friday nights belonged to Blockbuster, families planned around it. Entire social routines depended on it. And the business model was brutally effective. Late fees were the secret weapon. Customers hated them, but they paid them. Those fees generated hundreds of millions of dollars every year. From Blockbuster's perspective, this wasn't a problem. It was proof of power. Customers complained, but they kept coming back. And that created a dangerous illusion. Blockbuster mistook dependence for loyalty. They believed customers chose them because they wanted to, not because they had no better option. And when you believe that, you stop listening. Blockbuster optimized for short-term profit. More fees, more in-store traffic, more friction. What they didn't optimize for was trust. They saw inconvenience as leverage. Netflix saw inconvenience as opportunity. This is where disruption actually begins. Not with technology, but with empathy. Blockbuster had every advantage. Money, brand, distribution, partnerships. What they lacked was curiosity. They didn't ask, what do customers secretly wish this experience was like? Netflix did. And once that question is asked, an industry becomes vulnerable. Because the biggest companies don't usually lose to better competitors. They lose to better insights. Blockbuster was defending a model that worked. Netflix was quietly building the one that customers wanted. Netflix didn't start with better technology. They started with a better question. Instead of asking, how do we rent movies more efficiently? They asked, why do people hate renting movies in the first place? The answer wasn't the movies. It was everything around them. Late fees felt like punishment. Trips to the store felt inconvenient. Limited copies meant disappointment. Customers weren't excited about the experience. They tolerated it. Netflix realized something subtle but powerful. When customers tolerate you, they're already looking for a way out. So Netflix removed the pain points one by one. No late fees. No due dates. No physical stores, and most importantly, no pressure. You watched at your pace. You returned when you wanted. You felt in control. That feeling created trust. Trust is rare, and once earned, it's incredibly hard to replace. Blockbuster thought customers came back because they loved the brand. Netflix understood they came back because they had no choice. That difference in perspective changed everything. Netflix wasn't competing on selection or price. They were competing on emotional friction. And every time a customer chose Netflix, they weren't just renting a movie. They were voting for a better experience. This is how disruption actually begins. Not with innovation that looks impressive, but with innovation that feels relieving. Netflix didn't ask customers to change their behavior. They adapted to it. And once customers experience lower friction, They never forget it. That's when habits start to form. And habits are far more powerful than advertising. Then Netflix made the most dangerous decision in its history. They decided to kill their own business. Streaming was not profitable at the time. It was expensive, unproven, risky, and it directly threatened Netflix's DVD business, the very thing keeping the company alive. But Netflix understood a brutal truth. If they didn't disrupt themselves, someone else eventually would. So they leaned into streaming early, before it was perfect, before customers even fully understood it. Blockbuster noticed, but they didn't act. They had the chance to buy Netflix. They walked away. To them, streaming looked small. DVDs were still printing money, stores were still full. Why abandon a model that worked? Because models don't die when they stop working. They die when something better replaces them. Netflix was willing to sacrifice short-term certainty for long-term survival. Blockbuster wasn't. This is where incumbents usually lose. Not because they lack resources, but because they protect the past too aggressively. Streaming wasn't just a new delivery method. It was a behavior shift. Instant access. No planning. No trips. Once customers tasted that convenience, there was no going back. Blockbuster tried to react, late. They copied pieces of the model without changing the mindset. But by then, Netflix had momentum. And momentum compounds faster than money. This single decision didn't just kill Blockbuster. It rewired how entertainment would be consumed forever. Just when Netflix looked unstoppable, it made a decision so bad it nearly destroyed the company. In 2011, Netflix announced it would split its business in two. DVD rentals would become a separate company called Quickster. Streaming would remain Netflix. Customers were furious. Overnight, a simple service became confusing. 2 accounts, 2 logins. 2 bills. What Netflix thought was a strategic restructure felt to users like betrayal. Subscriptions were cancelled in massive numbers. Hundreds of thousands of them. The stock price collapsed by more than 70%. This wasn't a competitor attacking Netflix. This was self-inflicted damage. And here's the dangerous part. The logic wasn't entirely wrong. Netflix wanted focus. They wanted to accelerate streaming. They wanted to shed DVDs faster. But they underestimated one thing: customer psychology. People don't evaluate decisions rationally. They evaluate them emotionally. Netflix violated trust. And trust, once broken, spreads faster than growth ever does. For a brief moment, Netflix looked like it might become the next Blockbuster, a dominant company that misunderstood its users. But then something rare happened. Netflix admitted it was wrong. No spin. No corporate doublespeak. No excuses. They killed Quickster almost immediately. That decision didn't erase the damage, but it stopped the bleeding. Most companies double down on bad decisions. Netflix reversed course. That humility saved them. After surviving its biggest mistake, Netflix did something even bolder. They stopped relying on Hollywood instincts. Instead of asking executives what might work, Netflix asked the data what already worked. They tracked everything: what people watched, when they paused, when they quit, what they binged, what they abandoned after one episode. This data revealed something revolutionary. Netflix didn't need to guess what audiences wanted. They could measure it. That insight led to a radical idea: produce original content, guided by data, not ego. This wasn't about replacing creativity. It was about directing it. Netflix could see patterns that studios couldn't. They knew which genres overlapped, which actors drove completion rates, which stories created binge behavior. Traditional studios made pilots and hoped. Netflix made bets backed by evidence. This strategy changed everything. Originals weren't just content. They were a moat. Competitors could copy streaming. They couldn't copy Netflix's data advantage. Every viewer made Netflix smarter. Every click widened the gap. This is how Netflix went from survival mode to industry dominance, not by avoiding mistakes, but by learning faster than anyone else. Today, Netflix faces more competition than ever before. Disney, Amazon, Apple. Traditional studios turned tech companies overnight. On paper, these competitors look stronger. Deeper pockets, massive libraries, global brands, and yet, Netflix keeps winning. Not because it has the best shows, not because it spends the most money, but because Netflix understands one thing better than anyone else: attention. Netflix isn't competing with other streaming platforms. It's competing with sleep, social media, and boredom. Every decision is optimized around one question: how do we keep people watching? The interface, the recommendations, the episode structure, even the cliffhanger, everything is engineered to reduce decision fatigue. Competitors still think in terms of content releases. Netflix thinks in terms of habits. Open the app, press play. Don't think. That simplicity is incredibly hard to replicate, because it requires more than money. It requires patience, data, and years of iteration. Netflix doesn't just react to viewers. It learns from them in real time. And every new user strengthens the system. This is the flywheel effect. More viewers create more data. More data creates better recommendations. Better recommendations create longer watch time. Longer watch time attracts more creators. Breaking that loop is almost impossible once it's mature. Blockbuster had scale, but no feedback loop. Netflix built one and protected it. That's why competitors keep chasing. And Netflix keeps setting the pace. This story isn't really about Netflix. And it's not really about Blockbuster. It's about how businesses die, and how a few manage to survive. Blockbuster failed because it optimized for comfort. Netflix survived because it optimized for learning. Blockbuster defended what worked. Netflix questioned what worked. That's the first lesson, that if your business depends on customers tolerating pain, it's already vulnerable. The second lesson is harder. Netflix was willing to destroy its own success before someone else did. That takes courage, and it takes humility. Most companies don't die because they make mistakes. They die because they refuse to admit them. Netflix nearly collapsed in 2011. What saved it wasn't technology. It was speed of correction. And the final lesson is the most uncomfortable. Data doesn't replace judgment, IT challenges it. Netflix didn't remove creativity, IT removed guessing. In a world where attention is scarce, the companies that win are the ones that listen the fastest. Blockbuster listened to its balance sheet. Netflix listened to its users. And only one of them is still standing. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Netflix didn't win because it was smarter than everyone else. It won because it stayed paranoid. It never assumed the game was over. It never believed its position was permanent. Blockbuster thought dominance meant safety. Netflix understood dominance means responsibility. The moment you believe your business is too big to fail, you stop asking dangerous questions. Netflix keeps asking them: what if streaming isn't enough? What if attention moves somewhere else? What if today's advantage becomes tomorrow's weakness? That mindset is the real moat, and it applies far beyond entertainment. Whether you're running a startup, a school, a real estate business, or building a personal brand, the risk isn't disruption. The risk is comfort. Blockbuster didn't die overnight. It died slowly, quietly, and confidently. Netflix survived because it stayed uneasy, even when things were going well. That's the difference between companies that fade and companies that adapt. And this story isn't over, because somewhere right now, another Netflix is being built, and another Blockbuster thinks it's untouchable. The question is which one you're closer to. If you want more stories like this, stories about real businesses, real decisions, and the ideas that quietly shape entire industries, this is Biznest. And the next story will change how you see business even more.